I want to give you an overview of Italians in Chicagoland, not just the street Taylor, but Chicagoland, and that takes into account those little Oakley Avenue restaurants over by Western, High Wood on the North Shore, north of Evanston. We're all over. I say we because I'm Italian-American, third generation. My grandpa came over around 1915. That is typical in this neighborhood, second and third generation now. Some of the landlords are going to be fourth generation.
First generation.
You are?
Yes.
From
First generation.
From what province? What city?
My parents were from Sicily.
Yes. So were my grandparents, half side Naples and half Sicily. So that's quite a mix. What an attitude, you know, the temperament is hot in Sicily. I will start with the book cover, and this book was put together in 2012 based on scrapbooks. Museums like CPL has their own museum down at Harold Washington, can do lots of research from there, can go to Stone Park, to the Cultural Center, and gather all this. Oops, they're doing their duty.
Do you know when they were, about what year did they first, the Italians started to migrate?
The
In
1890s.
this area.
1890s in this area. And then the Sicilians
Where?
broke off.
And where? Do you
Well,
know what location?
The enclave is Sicilians up on Ohio Street. The other enclave was the Northern Italians, a bit more educated and skilled, going over to Oakley Avenue, working in factories I'll talk about, and doing needlework and skills, so like musicians, barbers. So we really broke off, even here, not all claiming that we're all Italians getting along, but that there were different provincial groups that came over, like you say, and would claim, I'm from this province, I'm from that, and I live in a different neighborhood. These Italians tended to be from the Naples, Mezzogiorno, middle of the country, middle of the boot, when you look at the map and the geography of Italy. But this, of all places, today is the University of Illinois Administration Building, which was knocking down many of these row houses to build the UIC in 1963. But I got this old cover from Historical Society in Lincoln Park for my cover. My editor said, that's the cover we want, that's the photo we want. And it seems to be that there's a ghostly person in here. There's an image. When I get closer with a telephoto glass, I can see an image in here, ghostly image. I see a greeter up here, and an arm coming down and around the horse's back. It's quite a long arm, so I always wonder, how did she get her arm around the horse? There's lots of little mysterious things about this photo, like why is he wearing modern day street clothes and the other people have vests and clothing of the 1800s?
Where that location is?
That's it, Morgan Street,
Where? Morgan?
Morgan and Harrison.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay, Morgan and Harrison.
And let's take a look with my arrows to provincial life. As you talked about Sicily, well, here's life in Sicily at the turn of the century into the 1900s. And these women are doing pretty rugged work, enough to make you see why they would come here in the first place when you get a look at provincial work. This is a husband-wife situation from the countryside and their country dress in Italy. Then as we talk about the street, this is Ferrara Bakery, the first iteration of Ferrara. Ferrara broke off with his partner Lessa. Lessa moved to the suburbs with his wedding cake business, and Ferrara stayed with candy and cookies. And he's still there if you've ever seen the wedding cake store down at West Taylor.
When did they break up?
1910?
I got
Yeah.
all these questions.
Well, hold some of them though for the Q&A.
My parents got got married in 1909.
Close. Close to the Letza establishment. Here's a birth certificate used for a visa, and 1894 is her birth. Natail, meaning birth date. And my Italian's not very good, but I'll translate what I can. This was donated from a restaurant in Cicero, and they had these photos to show me of the 1920s of family on Sunday and their Sunday best. My own grandma on the right with that marcelled hairdo donated that photo for me. And my people settled in Bridgeport once they arrived and off the trains and railroad. Knife sharpener. Now that was a real character in the neighborhood who would walk around, especially Thanksgiving week, trying to say, you know, are your knives sharpened? Get ready for the holidays. And we were able at Stone Park, where the History Museum is, to find that knife sharpener on wheels and bring it into the museum out in Stone Park, which is near Melrose Park. Yeah.
They
By
don't
the-
know the name. The reason I'm making a note with that, my sister, my older sister at the time, a friend of hers, her grandfather used to come to this neighborhood, and I don't recall the name. I thought it began with an L. I'm not sure.
Well, we traced this to Mr. Antononi. Antononi's knife sharpener. He would call out knives to sharpen. This is quite old when you look at the car grill, so we're looking at 1940s. We're able to see that. My interest is in the work they did, the little people. Not this month, Columbus, not this month, Mother Cabrini, or big figures like Michelangelo, Da Vinci. What did Da Vinci's helpers do for work? His helpers and that sort of thing.
They worked in the factories that were in the area.
Well, they were.
A lot of little
I will.
factories in the area.
I'll show you that. That's coming. Hold that. Newsboys under Dearborn Street here, under the Dearborn subway. We found out later, got tired of standing in the cold for dimes and nickels and unionized downtown Chicago. And I'll mention that union factor quite a bit.
Can I say something? See the newspaper man? That man?
Yeah, the News Tribune.
My brother-in-law's father had two stands near Union Station.
Wow. He made nickels.
Union Station.
He made quarters. Yeah.
He had both corners.
Let me look at, I wanted to say about these gentlemen, and I'm trying to get a back button. Well, I want to talk about some of the nefarious conditions where an immigrant without English support or temp agency office under state regulation would have to look for a countryman who could show him the ropes and where to get a job. And for that hookup, there was often a fee, could be taken out of your first week's wages according to what the padrone thought this job was worth. So often the first month you didn't get much left in your paycheck because the padrone here would be the sort of the godfather to the job. He's getting you, helping you get settled on the west side of Chicago. Jobs on Water Market and on Randolph Street were common. Fruit and vegetable vending. That was common. Now Randolph Street's a very glitzy place to have a dinner or a lunch. But in those times it was the fruit and vegetable, the produce center of the Loop. And I'm losing my, here it is. Here's my back button. Trucking was something they could get into without much facility in the English language. Offloading trucks on Randolph Street at the market or Water Street. There's my arrow way off in the border, so I have to keep an eye on it. So we talked about that. Whoop. Now why are we going back? There was one I wanted to show. Oh, this I wanted to tell you the story of. They said, oh, we're going to do better, we're going west. We hear there's big money in being cattle ranchers. So they got the accoutrements, they got the clothing, and they were set to be Western successful men. Writing back to the parents, here we are, here's a photo of us. We settled in South Dakota, of all places. So they didn't always stop in Chicago, but wandered on west to the Quad Cities area, Aurora, had an Italian community, and Elgin as well. Not gay workers and laborers, but brothers here. Sort of an unusual picture, made me stop and say, why are they holding hands? Well, they were brothers on the back of the photo, talked about that. Hi, welcome. All right, enough of that. I wanted to show early labor in Chicago. Coal mining downstate near Carbondale was also an attraction. Heron, Cherry, Illinois. That was a real conglomeration of jobs that would offer a male, usually, good wages on first arrival to Chicago. And there are those miners in downstate. Not much mining any longer. Coal is forbidden now, and not much to do as far as being a miner. Where did they come in from? And that was puzzling me for a while. I got to see photos of the Dearborn Station that's now, it's a Coldwell Banker outlet for real estate. They've converted the old Dearborn Station on Printers Row, they call it, as condominiums and offices now. But from New York, as you were at port of entry from a sea travel across Atlantic, you would then board the New York Central and you would arrive here. You would arrive at the old IC station here, now knocked down long ago for South Loop skyscrapers, or you would arrive at the Dearborn Station from New York.
How far south is that? Like on Dearborn as
This
well?
is South Loop, this is Dearborn and
Oak Street.
Polk. Polk, you could walk from Polk and the Dearborn Station all the way to the Hull House and the UIC neighborhood, where you found your countrymen here in Little Italy. So it was an easy walk from Dearborn Station or IC to Little Italy. This Little Italy, and not north or further from the Loop. Track work was a common job for the common man, immigrant, man, woman. I want to stress that in this lecture, that I'm looking at common workers, men and women, and not great men, great women, as we often do in October. I thought I'd look at this, what your ancestors did, what common people did for work. And many are Italian. Building our Loop skyscrapers and riveting. A good paying job, but a dangerous one when you get into the air. And yeah, into the air. And here is, come on, we needed that. I needed that. Old stadium. The old Chicago Stadium was there before the Bulls had it. And so in the 1930s, that was the place to see prize fights, wrestling, that sort of thing. And it took many Italian laborers and others, Poles, Irish, so on, to put that together in the 1930s. But it was close to our west side, so you could take a streetcar or a bus to the work construction site. That's Madison area, Madison and Damon. I seem to be charging by these, and I don't mean to. I'm sorry. Another is outdoor construction. Hello, welcome. Ciao, bene. Looking at this, he's pitching tar. He's pitching tar on the streets and paving. And construction, like the core here of the, anyone recognize this tower? David, you might know, high-end apartment living. Before we built the marina. The marina. So in the 50s, early 60s, this was to be put up. So yes, they built the core elevator first, very unusual. First the elevator, and I built around it with like, reminds me of those cookies where you'd put them on your finger when you were a kid, and you'd layer up your finger and then eat the cookies. That was the idea of these floral petals made of concrete. And floor after floor after floor were put up. It was a very revolutionary building for its time, 1962. And then Sun Times, of course, is gone, and in its place is Trump Tower, leering down at us, gloating. The big sign. People don't like it. Otis, I got this shot of Otis Elevator, employed many workers from the neighborhoods. Terrazzo, the Terrazzo and Mosaic workers were very skilled and brought in from Italy to do fine work like the walkway to the planetarium in 1933 for the World's Expo in 1933. Terrazzo and Mosaic workers. They kind of, they had such a grip on the industry, they wrote the blueprints in Italian language because most of the workers were Italian in laying the terrazzo. This is not a group of workers, but a group of tourists coming in for the Century of Progress Expo in 1933. Of course, another trade for Italians was barbering. And this was a barber shop on the west side, closer to the stadium. Shoe workers, common trade here along Taylor Street. The last shoe worker, I was told, left in the 80s. And the last barber left, Art the barber left 2 years ago, I want to say, and closed his shop. Now it's a bakery. From making the shoe to selling the shoe. This was a shoe store north of Evanston in the Highwood middle-class Italian-American community. If you have made it in Chicagoland, you had the money to move to Highwood or Berwyn or Cicero, and I'm talking about the 1920s for upwardly mobile Italians who didn't stay in the hood here. Open a store, open a shop. Well, right on our street, and still here, is Sharugi. Still here. Now, I believe that was a relative of Paul, but Paul is not a Sharugi anymore. He's our current owner. He and his wife sit there every day and sell you the hardware. I'm sure you've been over there, Dave, to buy some sort of gadget.
I'm sure Paul will tell you, I think he worked at 1022 West Taylor.
Oh,
In
it's,
that-
His
yeah.
father.
His father, Joe?
Yeah.
Was
his
it?
father.
was it?
His
I didn't
father
know.
worked for the Cherubis.
I thought he bought Sharugi
Well,
out
then probably
Well,
he did now.
He probably did after the,
after he rose
original Cherubis.
in the ranks. You know,
I
this,
think they were from northern Italy, the Cherubis. I
Oh,
think, I'm not
mm-hmm,
sure.
mm-hmm.
1022
Yeah.
now is the parking lot of Tuscany.
Tuscany.
Very good. You really know the street.
Taylor and Milan.
Very good. Although this is a very old advertisement, Paul still sells mechanics to make grape wine,
Yeah, for wine, yeah.
to ferment the wine and, you know,
You guys have one in your
puree
basement, right, Joe?
the
Oh,
grapes.
yeah, got a wine press in your basement.
We did have.
The wine press.
Yeah.
He still makes an effort at it, although many students don't just come in and say, I want winemaking equipment.
Well, they make it differently now.
There are the presses.
Yeah, look at that, yeah.
Not only did Mr. Sharugi make money in the wine presses, but in bikes, a common form of transportation, yeah, in bicycles. I see the bottles for the wine on the shelf there. Well, I keep skating by this, and here's Paul in better days here. He was quite young.
What address is that?
He was over where I think Vintage restaurant is.
Yeah, no, Paul is on this side of the street.
Paul's on the north side now.
Yeah, much smaller place.
And he's much older now in that I took this shot, or no, he loaned me this shot and said it was him in the 1990s.
Yeah.
Pompeii started as a bakery, not the mammoth chain we've seen now. I've seen one at O'Hare Airport, an outlet. I've seen one in Oak Park for Pompeii. It was a small bakery where you stood up and ate your baked goods, drank coffee, and ran. So here's a homecoming for one of the family.
More, huh?
Yeah, well,
Mm-hmm.
that was when they were on Loomis, right, Pete?
On Loomis, the little outlet on Loomis.
That's where they were.
Can I take a picture of that?
Oh, yeah. Go in and show it to Ralphie.
Yeah.
He's running it now. The DeVitos.
That's mine.
Right. And now we see the empire it is today. But the DeVitos are pretty modest. They don't really brag about their chain, and they don't sit in the back room and just count money and write invoices. They really get out there and serve tables. They still do, especially Ralph. We looked at Lessa and Ferrara, and you can still buy and order a wedding cake on Taylor Street. And confetti, they called it. Confetti was those little candies you get at weddings, those pink and white chocolate beans. It's called wedding confetti. Can still,
Thrown at you
yeah,
with the rice.
yeah, right.
And with pennies. And as children,
That hurts.
as children, the kids used to go, and the kids, well, when the bride and the groom came out of the church, they used to throw the stuff at the bride and groom, and the kids were there not to, they came because they knew that there was going to be pennies.
And they could pick up.
Thrown up, and there also.
This is the store today, of course. It's still there, and he's expanded the tables and settings there. We saw the cover of the book. At that time, Gonella Bakery, which still operates up near Ohio Street Colony, I call it. The Ohio Street Colony and Grand Avenue Colony was different in composition from the provinces the Little Italy community came from. Toronto is a big operation, not just in Illinois, but across state lines, selling fresh breads out of the Cicero Bakery. And I wanted to talk about a few big companies you may recognize that employed lots of Italians from 1890 till they closed in 1970. Things like the Florsheim Shoe Company made quality shoes.
I worked at Florsheim Shoe
Did you work there?
Yeah, the one on Clinton.
It's condos now.
Yes.
It's condos now.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see a shot of it in the interior.
We worked there after school.
You've all heard probably of Chicago Heights. The Italians of Chicago Heights generally work down at foundries and large companies like the Pullman Company and the Crane Company. Also out in Cicero, the Brock's Candy Company, gone. So many of these are gone. Hart, Schaffner, and Marx, making suits not far from here, employed many Italians.
My mother worked there.
And Hart Schaffner.
The Express, yeah.
Hart Schaffner is condos. It's still standing. Yeah.
You know, there used to be a big, what was it, the Sawyer biscuit there, Roseanne? In there, it was, I think it was
Bisco.
Sawyer biscuit.
Yeah, what became the Bisco? The
Oh.
It's on the other side of,
And there was also a Bremner Brothers. They used to make little cookies.
Bremner crackers.
Yeah, they used to make the little cookies in a little packet. That, remember, if you went to a soda fountain, you would have a soda, and they would give you cookies.
Cookie in the
little
top,
cookies in a
sure.
little packet.
Yeah, cookie in the top. Nabisco just closed 2 summers ago, and that's a big loss of employment.
yeah.
So many of these major producers closed, and it breaks my heart because it was the lifeblood of the Chicagoland area until the 80s, and then financial trouble took over. Various conglomerates took over these companies, or they just closed all together.
You know, it was like probably a lot of other cities. The
would walk or take
I mean,
streetcar.
it wouldn't take you 2 hours to get to your job.
Yeah, or a
You
bus.
walked
Very close to here.
close to-
Buildings that were productive, like Oxford Shirt, Kuppenheimer, they're all turned into West Loop, Morgan Street area.
Right on the other
Condos.
side, yeah, it was all small industry.
It's so ironic.
Side of Garrison.
Where they used to pay us, we now pay them for mortgages, don't we? I mean, really.
Atlantic or the other? What was the other one?
General Electric used to be on Taylor.
Hot Point, General Electric.
On Van Buren, there was the automatic electric, they used to make the telephones,
Hmm.
and then I think they moved to Cicero.
Yeah, where AT&T was. Yeah, Western Electric. Here's a shot of the floor at Florsheim. Pretty awful conditions in that you had to use available light to do your fine stitching. And they do vests. Gentlemen at that time wore vests and three-piece clothing. Hart Schaffner did not make women's clothes, but made fine suits. And I think it's pretty tough conditions on the eyes to be doing that. Talk about other dangerous conditions. This is Crane, the Crane Factory company, not far from here on Western Avenue. But if you get a closer look, she's wearing restraints on her wrists, in that if her hands were sucked into the machine, it would pull the belts and shut down the machine. But that's still very dangerous to be working in that sort of setting.
So what did they make there?
Two women there. Crane made bathroom fixtures, plumbing,
Oh,
Yeah.
The water tanks?
Pieces.
Did they also make the water?
toilet tanks, the porcelain, and yes. Now, I want to talk about a strain of Italian activism that didn't want to put up with working conditions as they were, especially in big rich companies like Hart Schaffner and Marx. So there were strikes, there was talk of socialism, there was talk of rolling back here, rolling back long hours and the low wages and the conditions for better conditions for immigrants. And so out of this turmoil comes the unions. This one in Italian talks about coming to Hull House for a meeting on working conditions. And Hull House always supported the immigrant laborer. On all the signs, I mean, the idea was Jews would relate to Italians, and they both worked in the sweatshops, and they both worked in factories, so their signs show the brotherhood in Hebrew and in Italian. Very radical, very outspoken, and so were the women. Give us bread. This is pane e rose. Give us bread, but give us roses. In other words, we want our 40 hours, and we want good labor, and we want safe conditions, and we'll make our own living, but give us roses on Saturday and Sunday, no forced overtime. So I'm looking at meat packers, looking at the CIO, which organized heavy industry, like steel, like in Pullman, like in US Steel, the auto workers, the musicians even organized, and had control from playing in studios all the way up to LP production and royalties. This man, Petrillo, was pretty well known for organizing free concerts in the summer at Grant Park. But some of the, I had to tell you, some of the lists of companies and trades that were organized finally into unions were the barbers, I'm surprised. The upholsterers of chairs and furniture, elevator operators tried to organize and unionize, projectionists in theaters, and if they were on strike, there was no movie that week. Newsboys, and there was a play a couple years ago called Newsies downtown on Dearborn Street, and it was about the kids who were in that sort of labor, selling newspapers, rain or shine, night and day, who tried to get organized. And finally, I found, to my surprise, funeral grave diggers tried to form a union. And I hope on the day I buried my loved ones, they wouldn't be on strike. That would be a terrible situation. But that's the extent that this whole union talk had gone into, organizing every possible sector of the musicians to get royalties in that case. And this is the theater named after Mr. Petrillo, who organized the musicians' unions for royalties. It's called the Petrillo Bandshell downtown, and I think we all know it. We've been to, in Grant Park. Here it was when he built it. It was a big steel semicircle, and they thought that that was too leaky, and then came out in Grant Park and put together the new bandshell. Still stands. Petrillo and confronting Mr. Eisenhower, President Eisenhower on the left, for federal national strikes that he wanted to organize. Mr. Petrillo wanted to organize these things, and there were mediators trying to settle the strike. Mr. Kennedy and the Garment Workers Union, and here he was a senator, so this is quite a long time ago in the 50s, helping to organize and settle the garment strike at Hart, Schaffner, and Marx. And right down as I come to the end and the closing here, you can recognize Mr. Daley, boo, even today, boo. And the president here is Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter with,
Well, they're the only ones alive.
Yes.
yeah, still. And Rosalind, right? That's Rosalind
Yes.
Carter. And I think down here she's,
Probably one of their children.
I thought yes, she's looking down, but I'd say Amy, little Amy here was about 6. And Mom's got her hand, and they're walking in the Italian-American annual Columbus Day parade. And even the Republicans got into that, the parade march, George Bush. And Nello Ferrara, the man who started the Ferrara Candy Company, is here.
Okay. Now, who's the man behind him? Was he a union,
Yeah, he was a big union organizer and Italian for the Teamsters. I think it was Jimmy Coley, for the Teamsters Union. And here, this grim-looking fellow, I'm sure, is a bodyguard for George Bush. He doesn't look happy at all. No. And so, I bring you back to the beginning, but I wanted to close with this shot of this Columbus parade from the 60s.